All
Okay.
right. Hey everyone, welcome to the Man Talk podcast. This is episode 42. Today we're going to talk about the meaning of life, or no, today we're going to talk about why we're going to leave California in the future, or at least give what reasons why we should leave California. So, over the past month or so, since the fires have blown up in California and destroyed a lot of wildfire land, me and Jacob have been discussing, oh, why do we even live here to begin with? Can't really breathe the air. The quality of life's gone down significantly, which we'll go into details of how. And it just got us talking and trying to figure out, like, oh, are we here just because this is our childhood home, or is because there's an actual basis for it? So, Jacob, what's a reason that you want to leave California? What's happened in your life in the last few years that's motivated that desire?
Sure. Let's get started with how things were in California in the Central Valley in the 90s. So, 1990s versus now, like not even the same California, not even a bit. So, 1990s, the Central Valley was prime location for family. Prime location, like 100%. So, everyone in their right mind that's middle class, that's somewhere in the Central Valley, wants to have a good family place to set up. So, over near Bakersfield, that actually is a decent place to do it at this time. We're coming out of the Cold War. Everyone's really happy. There's this new morale boost in the early 90s for the United States to kind of get things back on track following the end of the Soviet Union in 1991. So I'm not even kidding. My own parents, they get married in June 1991. Okay,
Oh,
I'm
wow.
born in 1992. So they fit right into the culture on this one. Not even kidding. So they've set up shop in a little small town outside of Bakersfield, and like many other people, just want a simple, quiet town to grow up. So 18 years later, the town, for the most part, stays the same, but the subtle changes of politics show up in the 2010s. And this is when we start seeing a shift in why California gets less desirable, at least for me. So up in Davis, it's a different story. The good liberal mindset of competence and open mindfulness and considering all your options, don't let procedure or these other old ways of doing things stop you from doing something more effectively. That's still prime time over in the University of California. Not really a big issue yet. But you start seeing these subtle problems that are showing up. But for the most part, the culture itself is stable. Then 2011 hit. And then you started seeing the pepper spray incident show up. And then all of a sudden, UC Davis is all over the news. Julie and I were actually walking out of linear algebra at one point, and we got to see the aftermath of it. Um,
Yeah, we biked right by it.
and we're just going, well, looks like the campus is in an uproar. I guess let's just go home. So,
Yeah, we weren't participants in it, just outside observers.
so following that, there was this Occupy Wall Street movement where there was a bunch of tents and stuff that was set up in the quad, the same place where they had the pepper spray incident. So for a few months, you have a fair amount of political uproar, and by about the end of what do you say, 2012, people kind of lost the momentum, and some of the tents were hanging there, and they finally took them down after a few weeks, and things kind of got back to normal. And oh, okay, cool. So the radicals are gone. Um, the the good liberal left shows up in the university again. It's pretty much about how do you do something more effectively? Can we have an open mind? Can we discuss things? All those are great questions, and it happened. Some of my best liberal friends are from that university. Um, then 2014 happened, so we graduated around that time frame, and I started getting messages from my old mentorship family, and they started saying, "Hey, Jake, the university's kind of changing. Do you know why? Do you know, like, what was it like for you? They're kind of asking how it was before they got there. So I didn't really know what they meant by that at the time because I thought university wasn't really that big of a deal. I go, yeah, there was some radicals, but on the whole, people were pretty easygoing in Davis. A lot of bikes and knowing how to get to your classes and just knowing the material, studying really hard. And then, of course, you always had the party group and stuff. But for the most part, you had a fair amount of competent people stacked in one area. So it wasn't that hard to find people that you'd be able to collaborate with and be able to do something with. But the culture started to shift. And the mentees started to notice that. And it was kind of a shocker because I'm going, that's not the university that you're describing that I just left. Like, not even a bit. So they're describing the safe spaces thing, thought police, making sure that everyone's in the same consensus about political issues. Not really a thing back then, except for the radicals back in 2011 and 2012 when they're trying to do the Occupy Wall Street movement. For the most part, people were like, we're here to study. We're here to do things not for political gain. We're here for a purpose. And every campus usually has some level of radicals trying to change things. And that's why they get noisy, and they got noisier for sure. But I think they got so noisy to the point where it actually started to get the average person involved with some of these social identity politics. And identity politics being, I'm going to split you into this group, I'm going to be in my group, and if you're not in my group, I'm going to be at war with your group. Very tribal to do something like that to other people. Because before that, it was, yeah, well, I'm a Democrat, but I don't care. Like right now, we're talking about biology. Let's focus on the class, you know? And then, well, I'm more of a Republican, but I don't really care. Let's talk about chemistry.
Yeah, it was a very gradual but also dramatic shift from our freshman year in 2010 to by the time we graduated, things became extremely politicized in contexts where we weren't really exposed to that during our undergrad. And that shift was strange because, like you said, we were more focused on our studies. We weren't trying to be political people in addition to our studies. But this fusion of politicalness with our engineering coursework became, relatively hard, if not impossible, to avoid. It would come up in conversation, whereas beforehand it would not. And that social consciousness shifted from, okay, your political opinions are your own and people respect your differences in belief, and shifted more towards, no, your political positions are largely based on tribal positions that are assigned to you, and you're somehow not your own individual person anymore. And then that's when things started to really go downhill because you start being characterized in such a way where, oh, you're not seeing me as an individual, you're seeing me as a member of a group and an advocate of that group. Whether or not that's true or not, uh, if you disagreed with them or had a contentious position that contradicted their worldview, either they would, just gracefully ignore you or confront you to try to make you see the error in your ways. Which, me personally, I've seen that a few times and then experienced it once or twice it when basically the claim is, oh, uh, something privilege. You don't have the context to know um, someone else's lived experience, and it's like, yeah, but I'm speaking from my perspective, and even if I don't know their experience, I still have my perspective, which is valid, and you can disagree with it, but to just outright ignore it is a little bit myopic and just closed minded. So definitely post 2015, Uh, it feels like the culture has gotten a lot more tribal, like identity group oriented, as well as politically motivated, as well as just contentious and unpleasant to have, like, what used to be normal everyday conversation, like, oh, what are you studying, what are you doing, how's work going? And now the sidebars are, oh, also, what are your politics, can I even be around you, like, do you hold beliefs that completely contradict my own? And I think speak for the both of us, that's a very toxic mindset to hold, because you start losing your connection with the individuals that are around you and directly in front of you, and you start seeing them as this weird, like, hive mind member of a group, which I don't like that.
So that's what my mentees were describing to me, but I didn't know exactly what it was because, again, my old frame of reference wasn't anything close to what they're describing. So I'm going, I feel like I'm being marginalized, that I can't speak my mind, regardless if, let's say, they were even more like central left. So somebody that was saying, I agree with the left more than the right, but I wouldn't go that far. Well, that's when that hive mind cancel culture comes in and says, no, if you aren't willing to go this far, we are not willing to include you. So it was very much that cancel culture that Julian's been describing in the last few minutes here. And so I started to see that more often. But again, it's more of an internet thing. I'm thinking, okay, maybe it's just toxic internet over the last few years of social media that's decided to ferment, and we're feeling its side effects. I'm going, okay, maybe it's that. Well, not quite. We're into the secondary and tertiary effects that's been happening with people directly. And I would continually get these messages from over time, over the last few months of 2015, 2016, in person. And it would usually be like one on one, that where they feel safe to be able to express what's going on. And they'd be saying things like, I feel like I can't say my opinion anymore. And as a college student, this is kind of where you get a lot of things ironed out. And you can't think without being able to converse with people and be afraid to be, if you're always afraid to be wrong because the hive mind's going to kill you socially and cut you off culturally, you're not going to be able to grow. And college for me personally was just, it felt like it took my brain and I had to upgrade it every year to make it more sturdy and robust. And I see some of these fellow compatriots of mine that are being denied space to be able to get stronger and find who they really are. These people are preventing them from doing that. So I got kind of mad, but I didn't know what to do about it. So we just did some mentorship sessions and hung out, and at least I tried to give them the space that they've been denied. And their friend groups tried to do the same thing, and it was cool. So you saw people finding a way around it, but it's just kind of strange that they had to do that in the first place. Because before, you just naturally do that, and you might talk about politics, but again, your reason for being at college wasn't that. It was for, I'm going to do this with my life. I want to get out of debt. I want to have some reasons for being strong and getting out in the world and becoming a full-fledged adult that's completely independent, that's going to contribute. And instead, it's turning into some other nonsense that it doesn't really have the same objectives as the individual climbing uphill. So that's been
Yeah,
unfortunate.
right. It's also, another way to phrase that is the emphasis on the individual has been mitigated significantly, to the point where individual opinions that deviate from the, I guess, socially acceptable norm are undervalued and kind of viewed through a lens of, oh, that person's more of an outlier and that's not representative of the group. And then simultaneously, group perspectives, hive mind uh, positions or thought seem to be more valued So it's almost socially advantageous to undermine whatever individual growth you might have and just adopt the popular hive mind position. One, because it's easier, because it's already developed for you. But two, and possibly more insidiously, it's just more socially secure. Like you can get all your friends and maintain your friendships if you just subscribe to the ideology. And it's very, unfortunately, it's very antithetical to individuality, and that, at least in terms of thought, and that's been disheartening to see increase year in year out as we've gone into the 2020s.
So we also need to talk about how groupthink and hive mind are showing up in industry. And that's where I really started to lose it because I'm going, so we're getting paid as people who have educated status, someone who is going to try and make things more effective, get groups together, do things as effective as we can, regardless of bias, just trying to see what works and make it happen in the engineering world. And I keep seeing compliance, not science, show up with some of these effective tools within our own management. And I don't even mean like where I work. I just mean what I'm starting to see in particular California, like just overarching California workplaces. And now I'm going, okay, so you can't speak up in social circles anymore because that's kind of where the university is. Okay, social circles, young people. You get out now that it's starting to metastasize into different parts of the my world. So that's not okay. So I'm going, so you can't speak up at the university. You can't speak up now in the workplace. You're not going to eventually be able to speak up anywhere. I see that trajectory going on. And as a country that's designed around the individual, and then individuals all bringing their perspectives together to actually come up with the truth so we can make the best choices, if we decide to do the cancel culture thing indefinitely, you may find out that we're just going to do the left wing version of what happened over in Germany. So this can happen anywhere, and I think that's something that's been unfortunate to see, particularly in California. But that's not the only thing I want to talk about for California. There was something else that has been really bothering me, and it's the thing I think everyone's been paying attention to. If you're ever looking at houses, is why the prices are going up indefinitely. Indefinitely.
Yep. Yeah. It's just the value of homes since the Great Recession have doubled or tripled in some cases in a short time frame, which is great for homeowners who were able to capitalize off of the recession, but terrible for the next generation who has to somehow balance stagflating wages, so wages that are being flat or not growing, with extremely high evaluations due to economic pressures from a global housing market, uh, as well as just having to find the best cream to crop jobs in order to just afford the housing in California. So you have all those factors at play to the point where you get priced out. That, on top of rising tax burdens from sales taxes to gas taxes to income taxes, just across the board, all the taxes make everything significantly more difficult to pay for, to live a lifestyle that we could have afforded back in the 90s in California. Like I was talking to some friends about, oh yeah, my folks bought a house in San Francisco back in the 90s before the tech boom, and they paid 200,000 in 200,000 in their dollars, which is probably three or 400,000 in today dollars, right? If you correct for inflation. But
Sure.
still, most houses in SF, because of their valuation and the nature of that market, are in the millions. And don't get started on the cost of rents, which are at the moment plummeting because of the pandemic. But before the pandemic, they just kept going up and up and up, and there was no abating it. The the demand was so much higher for the tech workers than the supply available in the Bay Area that the prices just got astronomical, and only a small sliver of wealthy tech people could afford it. And then that trickled out through many places in California. Even in rural places, you could be expected to pay 500,000 for a house that was maybe worth 200,000 only a decade prior.
Yeah, the inflation of house prices. I mean, so what's been on my mind too is California's negative effect on some of the rest of the nation, and it kind of shames me to say some of these things, but so what we think of the Bay Area folk just buying up houses in Sacramento during the pandemic because they don't want to live in the Bay Area anymore, and they're just, oh, I can work remote. I'm going to buy a house in Sacramento for 400,000. Done. Bought it with cash because I sold my house in San Francisco, and then I just made $400,000 on top of that. So people in California leaving are doing the same thing, going to like Boise, Idaho, or going to uh, Tennessee, and I kind of understand the similarity of how someone from Tennessee looks at someone from California that just bought something over there, and they just bought it cold cash, you know, and that same disdain I'm starting to notice in my own state just with people west of us because that threatens the whole local population that wants to buy houses. Like if I were in Boise and I saw someone from San Francisco just buy a house in Boise cash that was the best on the market and decides to buy a duplex because they had extra cash left over they didn't want to pay on the capital gains tax. Well, nuts, dude. That just took out two homes in a local neighborhood, and that's only one family. And if you do 100 families that do that within a year span, that local that was thinking about buying, that 28-year-old that's about my age, that decides, I'm saving up for a house, but maybe I'll do it one day. Well, crap! All these people that come from other states buy up the property, and now it's impossible with what they've currently got, and that would leave me feeling inadequate, frustrated, and thinking about moving myself. So there's this displacement that sounds like it's going to continue to happen until things get together in California. But unfortunately, that's one of the main reasons why I too would like to leave, though, is because I feel the same things that guy in Boise feels. Because in my local area, I feel frustrated that it's too expensive. I feel ashamed that I don't even have enough to be able to really compete with these people. And it makes me want to feel like I want to move so I can have a better shot somewhere else. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so essentially in the last decade since the recession, there's been a huge boom that's pushed out working class or upper middle class folks into other states where the cost of living is a lot more reasonable. And in that process, the communities where these people infiltrated have to compete with these highly qualified, highly skilled, pretty wealthy individuals relative to them. So, like a community in Tennessee where housing prices are always in the 200,000 or 300,000 range, has no like financial concept of, oh, there's a home in California, 3 bedroom home in a some outskirt of the Bay Area. Oh, well, and it's $600,000 in Tennessee. That gets you like a huge mansion and a ton of property, right? And it's all relative too. It's just the nature of this economy is really pushing out the middle, such that in California, what you tend to see is either legacy families, people who got into the boom before they got priced out. So, like our parents, let's say, Or you see like wealthy tech people who have a job that can compete, and then maybe extreme poverty, people just living tend to a household, scratching by on pooling their funds and making it work. Because if I'm not mistaken, California has the highest percentage of uh, individuals below the poverty line of any state, and we're the most populous state too. So it's kind of crazy to think that 20+% of our state is under the poverty level, despite all these extreme economic factors going on. It's like, how are those people surviving, and why haven't they left? Right?
Right. I wanted to ask you, Julian. So we've talked about the housing problem and hive mind issue within the politics that's started to show up all over the place. Can you tell me um, what has dismotivated or demotivated people from the personal responsibility aspect of California? Because that didn't used to be a problem, but I'm starting to notice it is. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, so I think it comes down to a few factors. First being a tragedy of the commons. So the mentality in California that I get is that a lot of people are self-centered and focused on what they have, to maybe the detriment of their community, with a few community exceptions. But what does that mean, right? So essentially, most people are fixated on their own lives, their own happenings, to the point where they're not necessarily interacting with the communities around them. Community engagement's down, and that's only exacerbated by COVID, right? Because we can't interact with people at all, or we're being punished if we do, if we, for example, congregate in churches or go to gyms, which has good intentions, right? We're slowing to stopping the spread of the virus, but the secondary and tertiary effects of that is, oh, we're becoming disconnected from our physical place, which I believe we talked about this in part when we were talking about the benefits of the internet, right? In one of our previous podcasts. It's like, yes, we get to be more connected in some regards, but then we also get to be extremely disconnected from our actual physical spot. And this is exemplified by remote work, right? Because you don't have to live in SF anymore. And why would you? It makes no economic sense to physically go into work because, one, it's not allowed. But two, if that's the case, you can work remote work anywhere for the next year or two. You're just going to move out of California and take your tax money with you. So there's that attribute. And then in terms of why this disconnectedness is being hyper accelerated, it's everyone's kind of getting siloed into this extreme economic tier list where you're not really interacting with people who are outside of your economic class. Whereas back in the 90s, economically speaking, everyone was more level. There was a bigger, broader middle class and more association with all those individuals within that group. But these days, you're either like extremely impoverished and you hang out within that silo, a very small middle class, or very well to do and pretty wealthy. And it's like, okay, those silos create these enclave communities within this physical space, right? But we're not interacting with each other. So you get this weird, like, how would I describe it? You get this weird like sense of fragmentation in California, where each city, each community doesn't feel like a community. Everyone feels separate from each other, and that's exacerbated by the economic realities that we're living through at the moment.
Right. So then the personal responsibility element being I'm only going to be as personally responsible to maintain this little bit of fragment that's not breaking at the moment. So everybody else, I'm going to make sure that they just stay away and I'm going to focus on my own little area. And that sucks because before it wasn't like that. You could just go up to anybody as depending on what was going on, and people just treat you with a baseline of politeness, respect, a sense that people are valuable and they have something to contribute. And people don't really see each other that way now here. If you talk to strangers, it's almost like you want to be careful talking to strangers now because you don't know who you're really going to run into as far as the hive mind thing or the I don't want to go into their fragment because they may get territorial. Um, and then
Yeah,
there's
and then on that note too, um, you get this vibe in California until you know, feel your way out of how you're supposed to negotiate it. That people uh, get weirded out when you talk to them on the street, like they're afraid of each other. Whereas, from what I've noticed in more economically flat states where everyone's about the same, people don't have that same distant disposition. They're more like open to conversation. They just have small talk. Small talk in California has kind of gone off a cliff, and you don't feel that connection with your peers.
sure, and it's not necessarily even the small talk that mattered. It was the fact that they cared enough to hear them out, let them talk a little bit, and not be so afraid of the stranger because that's what that practice does. You get a little braver by doing that. And I don't appreciate that about the personal responsibility of California because I think it makes people weaker. And that sucks. You'd think the government and anybody else, any leader, and forget government, just any leader would think that they want to have their subordinates and their compatriots as strong as possible so that that way we can all do something better. But instead, I see all this capacity that's being made weaker. And I've noticed with California, you got all the biomes, all of them: desert, snow, mountains, valley, rivers, lakes, ocean. You've got everything. And for some reason, we can't utilize all of this to make people come together. Instead, it's doing this fragmentation thing. And that's new. Again, in the 90s, we had a balance. And it didn't matter if you were from Tahoe or if you were from Bakersfield or San Diego. It didn't matter. And it's starting to make people just want to get the heck out because they go, well, you're telling me that there's places where I don't have to do this? Cool. I'll move there. And then maybe I'll have a shot at having a life again. And then every every person that I've talked to that has been leaving California, I haven't heard them doubt about their choice of leaving, which kind of worries me because I'm thinking, okay, is there bias? Did I talk to them like within the first 6 months? Like, what's going on here? But I call some of them back several years later. Not even a question of moving back. Like, no question. And that even so after several years I go, okay, now maybe there's something to it. It's not just that, oh, that I just got out of a horrible state and now I've actually got some breathing room. It's no, that was premeditated and we can actually get back to normal life again. So absolutely not, I will not return to California. And that gets me thinking, could it really be that easy to plan in advance moving out and then going somewhere where you can have a normal life again? Could it really be that easy? So that question came up, and I guess that's where some of this podcast material came up as well.
So, Jacob, since you touched on that, people not looking back on California, how would you incorporate like religious or family minded folks into that equation? Like, what has happened in California that's well affected the, let's say, integration of those two relatively important aspects of life, at least before before the early 2000s, such that people in California just don't either agree with it or think about it on a day-to-day basis.
You bring up a really good subject, which I don't. By the way, if there's anyone who wanted to talk to me about stuff, if this is one of those questions I would like to get asked more of, Because a lot of people like to steer away from this because before the politics thing came up, religion was the one that people would get kind of dicey on. So this started in the 90s versus the politics thing started in the 2010s. So 20 years earlier, it was about, oh, don't talk about religion. That's where it started to happen in the late 90s. And my parents, again, they ran into the same problem of, okay, we're going to church. Oh, now we're not. Church leader got corrupt. The thing's all over the place. We're going to break off. And yeah, we're just not going to do the church thing anymore. It's not happening. So this actually happened way, way back before the politics thing ever became an issue. And our generation got extremely skeptical about church from the get-go, from childhood, because they started to see a lot of people defecting or it was being too rigid. They have their reasons. But I noticed that the people who stuck it out, and not necessarily that went to church, but the people who, they said, you know what? God matters. Family matters. There's something more to this world than myself. God's given me this means to get out in the world and let the light shine on the hill, so to speak, which meaning that you're going to let your deeds be open and in good heart, and you'd be sincere in your actions, and you'd be allowed to be vulnerable with other people. All these things and characteristics people would still do, but it was starting to become countercultural in the early 2000s. So that's when people already started hating on religion for a long time, but there was a new hate of religion that started to come up in the early 2000s because all of these millennials have started to see church as a waste of time. And they saw a lot of bad leadership. They saw the mentorship thing going down. They didn't really get a lot of good advice growing up from them. And they had a lot of bad examples where they started thinking, you know, why would I even go anywhere towards that church? Why would I do that? Why would I wake up on Sunday morning to go worship? Why would I do this? Pastor, why would I talk to him? The guy rambles for 45 minutes and I can't wait to leave. Like, those are the thoughts people are having. But now the generation before that weren't as honest. But the kids were. The kids for sure were thinking about that, going, yeah, no, the minute I don't have to go to church, I won't. So it's good to bring these things up because a lot of people don't want to be honest about that. They don't want to be honest about the church system and how it's failing right now. But back then, it was failing for a long time. You're just starting to see it really unravel in 2020. That COVID thing with California saying churches ain't going to congregate, yeah, they exposed the wires that were already fraying from like 30 years ago. So now we've got a whole new mess on our hands, which is, okay, if the church goes, that's one of the biggest models for selflessness and for some level of personal responsibility, moral code, understanding there's a higher power beyond ourselves that has control and that
Community.
has community. All of these characteristics are now at risk of going into the garbage can, which usually God, family, church go together because there's the community aspect. There's a being higher than us that understands forgiveness and giving people a chance to step up again and be sanctified. And all of these characteristics are now under attack, which family needs structure, man. Regardless of what people say, family needs structure. And that model just works, dude. It works. You bring up good kids, the parents benefit from it, the community benefits from it. Everyone's got a direction to go for that's good. And there's a selfless aspect to it. And now that that's under attack directly from California, as a Christian myself of 15 years, that makes me want to just get the heck out immediately. Because what am I going to do? Home church? I mean, I guess that's not a bad idea. And in fact, I wouldn't mind that, but who are you going to do home church with in California?
Right. So touching off of that, what in California do you believe has accelerated this maybe anti-church, but more precisely, lack of spirituality permeating through the culture?
So there's starting to be an outcry, and this is actually something in the 2010s that started showing up that went beyond the "I hate church" because it's boring and it doesn't. I keep seeing these bad leaders show up. So the bad leaders thing continued to happen, but then there's the "now I hate God for allowing me to be on this earth" kind of thing. So then there's this lamenting hate towards whatever's up there, which is kind of funny because when you think about it, it's okay, so why are you even doing that? So he doesn't exist, but you're mad at him. I never understood that concept.
Yeah, that doesn't make a lot of sense
No,
logically.
but they are mad. That for sure is that's the thing. Um, but for some reason, they have decided that the next logical step is to pretty much curse God, but he doesn't exist. Okay, so that's the current line of thinking, and then now it's connected to the hive mind. So now that we're going from the 90s to now, you now have a hive mind characteristic going on with the hating God, with the hating church, and hating people who believe this stuff, period. On the spot. Oh, you're a Christian? Don't like you, don't want to hang out with you, get off my business, see you later. So it's starting to become on that level. And they have a group now that is, if you hate God or you hate Christians or people who, oh, remember, they're dumb, they're uneducated, they don't seem to have any contribution to society. What good do they do? They're just building another chapel over there. And they really reward themselves by talking this way to each other. They're like, yeah, dude, they're so self-righteous and they totally don't have any good to add to the world, and I hate God, and why are we even here anyway? We're just making the planet polluted. That kind of mindset you get to hear all the time, and you can read
Right.
it on you want.
Pes- Pessimism and nihilism towards existence itself.
So now you got like this motherboard hive mind where it's hooked up to nihilism, which you hooked on, which means that everything doesn't matter. You're hooked up to the hating people who are against that stand for something that you don't for the politics thing. So now everything's hooked up to this main hive mind, and it's destructive. It doesn't provide anything other than destroying the good systems that used to be there. So those are the things that I wanted to tell you about for what's going on with family and church. I guess family being the last part of this. So if you have that kind of nihilistic hive mind that is anti-God and anti-establishment or government, even like this year, anti-government feeling from the left, unbelievable. Never thought I would have heard that. I thought they always wanted daddy government to give them their welfare checks and stuff. So,
Yeah,
but
the trend towards anarchy is a strange one. I don't think the government takes it seriously, but if it's loud enough, it could have a significant effect on the society.
So all that put together, family doesn't really survive very well in a nihilistic sense because family, by its nature, thinks that you are valuable. We have a selfless nature that we need to strive for. That we have to fight our selfless or selfish nature. That everything we're doing has some level of reason, and we're here for a reason. And then, of course, because all of these things are pointing towards God, God matters, and He has a plan for why we're here. It's not nihilism, but nihilism is directly against what the family stands for. Ergo, they're going to try and run it over with a freight train.
Right. And then touching off the family aspect, it's like, right, so if you're just working to work and make a bunch of money and then grow in your career, that's just one facet of your life. It's not necessarily going to bring you a lot of meaning or a lot of joy. And I get the vibe from a lot of California is that people are just working to accumulate wealth, and maybe they have a family, but the family is more like a checkbox on their list of things that they need to do, less so like a meaningful endeavor to, raise the next generation. So, like in California, the undervaluation of family as opposed to other parts of the country is really literally undermines the growth of the country because the older generation dies off and then the newer generation's not reproducing, so you have this vacuum that's forming where you have a disconnect between the old and the new just essentially gives up. And they're like, okay, there's no point. I'm just going to make money and contribute to global warming. The planet's going to burn up in a bunch of wildfires. Why should I care? Right? So it's like, okay, that mindset is inherently toxic just because the point of human existence, in part, is the next generation reproducing biological processes, right? And all the narratives and stories we've conjured up over the millennium have allowed us to contextualize why we exist. And when you take away that context of, oh, there's a bigger, broader meaning to why you exist, and you substitute that for there is no meaning. In fact, why are you alive? How did you make it this far without offing yourself and just not having to worry about it? It's like, yeah, why participate in that society that doesn't value life, human life to begin with?
And that with that you said at the last couple sentences you said, that one of the other reasons why I want to leave is because I'm tired of it influencing my opinions and characteristics and what I stand on. Because every time I feel them push, it actually does move me towards that direction, and I see that it doesn't work. But it nonetheless pushes me that 5%, and I go, that's not what I stand for. But by God, I'm starting to feel that hive mind pull. I feel it. That's how people get hooked into it, and I don't want to be its next victim. And that
Right.
sucks, man. Because how how easy is it to fall into it? Even as competent, educated people, even as someone who's looking out for and understands what they are as a group, it still has an impact on what I think, and I think it's wrong. But it nonetheless is like it's like your
Psychological warfare, essentially.
yes, psychological warfare. It does trip my system a little bit, and I go, that's not correct. That's not right. And by its very nature, it destroys. So I would like to live in an area where that's not really an issue, or I can fight with people that can fight against it, and then now you're fighting against something together.
Yeah, and I would add to that, I want to live in an area, not necessarily California, but any healthy area that values like family, that values a sense of purpose in existing. Because that pessimism, that nihilism really psychologically kills you over time. It's like a this leech that sucks off your humanity and sucks off your will to just to continue into the future. And it's like day after day, if you are plugged into the news apparatus telling you that the world is blowing up, that the world is on fire, that things are going to hell in a handbasket, it's like, yeah, you're going to check out from your physical existence and then try to live in this more virtual fantasy land of your imagination. And it's like, no, virtual fantasy land isn't real. It's real in a tangential sense, but a healthy life, a happy life, really maintains that connection with other humans, with nature, with things that are more complex than a bunch of yelling matches in online virtual spaces, or unfortunately, real life safe spaces of echo chambers and basically situations where if you were to speak your mind, that you would be excommunicated and just depersoned, essentially, like you don't exist, like your perspective is not valid. That's psychologically like devastating. And at least in the last decade, I've really gotten the impression in California that you really do have to sit down, shut up, and then just focus on your work. And then maybe have a small group of friends who share your philosophies in some degree so that you don't go crazy or you don't compromise your own belief systems.
And I'm glad we got to have some of this actually put up, because sometimes it's not always the right time and place to talk about why leaving California would be this big of a deal. But when you start to really unpack it and you give it time, like we did, crap, dude. I don't think we're really done yet. I think we still got a couple other points, but just even
I'm
what we
pretty
have.
sure we've just scratched the surface, but we'd probably have to revisit this and go into detail on additional reasons why the current culture and specifically for the California context is, essentially toxic.
Yeah, especially that thing we talked about a few minutes ago about what it does to family and what it does to individuals, and it's like this ball of destruction that's just aimed at just whatever stands for anything that is meaningful and actually is trying to honor God and trying to just, just hold up something moral. It wants none of that, and it doesn't care about what casualties of their own hive mind. They don't even care about the casualties of their own people, which is sad in itself, because all these people they're giving them everything, and they're getting nothing in return. In regards to that, like the rioters, what did they win? A pair of shoes for looting a store, or a backpack?
Yeah, it's like in that context, it's like, yeah, there's an economic struggle going on, and the need to try to balance that out with a culture war that's trying to fragment our society into these silos of, I guess, meaning and lack of meaning, to put it very broadly. Because if you think your life is valuable and you think there's some meaning to be had from it, I guarantee that little bit of optimism can sustain you through the darkest of hallways that you have to traverse until you get to the brighter side at the end of the tunnel. But if you adhere to a more nothing means anything mindset, then it's like you're already starting off on the wrong foot. There's no, like, once you travel down that path, it's really hard to walk backwards because you basically have to unlearn a bunch of bad mental habits that got you there in the first place.
Oh yeah, automatic negative thoughts, and it's not even just about negativity. It's about the lies, the automatic negative lies, the ANLs, because
Right.
which
Exactly.
which is the harder untangling, because your brain's already going to think that, and then you're going to have to take active measures to, well, the last time I followed that, it didn't get me to the place where I thought I was going, and I was in a worse place at the end of it. So maybe I should stop listening to that. Well, that's easy to think about it in this kind of context, but life isn't always like that. Life's not always like on a podcast format. Sometimes there's other things going on, and then you get distracted, and then you find yourself going down that same road again.
Right. It sounds like we have a lot more to discuss on just this topic, so let's revisit it again in the future.
Be more than happy to, Julian. Yeah, only the surface for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for listening.
Cool, guys. Yeah, I didn't know we were going to go that far.
Well, it's funny. It's paradoxical, right? We went pretty deep, and then we only scratched the surface
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, that
because we didn't even get into what's it called? The problems with complete freedom. It's like California, you can be whatever you want, but in practice, people are thirsty for boundaries. Like you can see that in homeless encampments, right? That's just pushing, yearning for boundaries. Because it's like we're a bunch of kids always getting what we want, and we're bearing the results of that mindset. Oh, let's just give them what they want. Let's give them what they want. But yeah, there's a cost to that. We need
Correct.
boundaries. We need boundary conditions to be humans.